Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think Greg's going to join us in just a few minutes. He's just at another meeting. Want to welcome Tim Adams and Suzanne Welch from MAC LLP in Waterloo as our experts today. Maybe Suzanne, you want to give us the 411 on MAC LLP and what you do, who you are?
All right, we're MAC LLP is a full-service accounting firm in Waterloo and Elmira. We've got 2 locations. We've been around for, Tim can correct me on this, 30 years?
Yeah,
doing mental math. Yeah, so we basically do everything that we can for our clients. We do audits, reviews, notice to readers, personal tax, corporate tax, US tax, wealth management. Try to be a one-stop shop for everything that our clients need.
Good. Well, and because they're in Elmira, which is in Woolwich Township, they're part of what makes the greater KW Chamber greater, which is Woolwich Township makes greater KW Chamber greater. In any event, yeah. Greg from the Cambridge Chamber will join us shortly. Maybe to get started, there was one question I think from the last go around on startup funding. And I think it was less cash flow support. There's 2 aspects of that. One is for newer companies for things like the wage subsidy and other programs that may not have the financial records as a new company. But also there was some as startups. There are still some of those funding programs that are that they might be eligible for, which are not part of the rent relief program or the wage subsidy program. Do you want to maybe just touch on the issues around for a newer company in accessing the wage or the relief programs? Suzanne, you want to take a crack at that?
Who's going to go first? Yeah, one of the things we noticed for our clients was that if you don't have the history, it can be difficult. Just because pretty much everything was based on what you did in 2019. So if you started up in 2020 or end of 2019 and say didn't have a year end before, you wouldn't have that history. So a lot of our clients have been finding that difficult.
Okay.
In terms of actual,
I think one of the things is when you're running into troubles is, persistence. We talked about this in last week's show when we talked about this, is sometimes applying several times before you get the secret sauce. We know that many of our people that have been successful have had to do it a couple of times for whether it's the rent relief program, wage subsidy, or even the SEBA program, where there's been some miscommunication between financial institutions and CRA who are making the judgments. So, okay. One of the other things, and I think we touched on this, maybe, and as opposed to me arguing, I think that there was some information that came out from the Ontario government around the Ontario Small Business Grant Program. Do you want to kind of refresh people on what the criteria are? Tim, I don't know if you want to go on that, or Suzanne?
Sure, yeah, I can touch base on those. So there's a few different things. There was one for PPE. Not sure if that's one of the ones you're referring to there, Ian.
Yep.
So that was for certain industries and sectors. I don't know if anybody on the call today are in those industries, but it's retail and food services. Grant up to $1,000 for that one. The other grants have to do if you were shut down. $10,000 to $20,000 loan. Criteria for those, or eligibility for those ones, you apply through the province for those grants. As Ian was saying, it's complicated. The banks, if you're talking to them, don't always understand. The employees at CRA and the province don't always understand either. So we find we're reading what's on the websites on a regular basis to stay up to date. Those tend to be correct. Even if you're talking to somebody at those government agencies, they might not totally understand. Okay. There also is a property tax and energy cost rebate is the other one that the province announced. Again, it has to do with shutdown. So you have to be in certain industries that would have been totally shut
And I guess that's one of the confusing parts is that have been companies like, so in the Ontario Small Business Grant, if you're a restaurant, which, you didn't have to be closed, you could have done curbside or others, you were eligible for it. But a dry cleaner is an example who I guess in theory could stay open except for no one's bringing clothes in, which effectively is closed, but wasn't on the list. What some are doing, and I'm not necessarily saying we're condoning this, but a lot of folks are applying and picking a category that is there, and some are being successful. I know I saw yesterday or last night an email that came in that said that there's $1.5 billion that was allocated to this. About 950 million has been gone out the door to about, I want to say 600 or 67,000 businesses. So some are getting between 10 and 20,000, but there's been an awful lot, probably far more than that, that have been declined because they didn't fit the categories. So
Yeah.
for those listening, and my suggestion is there's lots of categories. See what you think you fit into, and keep applying, because I think they're taking a more permissive sort of approach to how they make decisions, yes or no, and especially if your your revenue is going down significantly, I think that they're maybe not applying that obligation to have been in lockdown, like totally told to shut down. Just as an example, and I guess the reason I say this is the dry cleaner that I go to, his business dropped about 80, from 40%, 45% down to 80, 85% down because of the lockdown, because no one was going out. And they're specifically not weren't allowed. So, I said, well, are there other categories? He said, yeah, there's one in personal services or other things. So he applied, and, it looks like he's going to get it. So I think that they're taking a more, and again, that falls into the reasons to apply. I'm sure you're getting from your client base, folks that have applied several times before they got successful, whether it's on wage subsidy. Maybe if you can maybe touch base on that, then I'll go to Giselle and Amand and see if they have specific questions about, you're working with clients, but if you're doing it on your own, persistence pays off in these things.
Yeah, our advice has always been, excuse me, if you're not sure, you should probably apply, because most of the time they're going through. And as I was saying before, the CRA doesn't always know, and the province doesn't always know whether you qualify. So if you don't, you won't get it for sure. So we always say qualify. And we've had some questions around, well, I qualify, but I don't need it. And we, again, advise qualify. If you meet the rules, that's the intention of the program.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's better to keep trying, as you said, Ian. Keep trying till you get it.
Yeah, and one of the, and I guess one of the ones that I've heard a number of folks, the federal government announced on the SEBA, which is the bank loan program, the first 40,000 of which 10,000 if you repay it back by, I don't know what it is, December 2023 or something, but whenever the period 22. And then they announced another 20 on top of that. And some people have been having difficulty getting that. And part of the reason is they were approved for the first one, but may not have drawn all of the 40,000, which is usually a line of credit as opposed to cash going into an account. But however it's structured with the bank, if you don't use it all, or at least take out the loan or the cash, they're declining the next 20, even though you may say, look, I need that for materials to ramp up for production, or pay rent, or whatever the case may be. If you haven't used it, and so I think that's one of the is that Suzanne? I think that's one of the things is you got to access the full on the SEBA program, full amount before you can go for the next 20.
I haven't specifically seen that you need to access it before you can apply for the next 20, but we are suggesting to clients that they basically prove that they used it. So transfer the full amount to their accounts, make sure that they're using the funds for operating expenses. So you want to make sure that it shows that you needed it.
Yeah, for those for the expenditures that are eligible under SEBA.
Yeah, and we did see that they granted that in a variety of ways. Whether it was a loan or cash or even prepaid credit cards.
So the details matter in these programs, right? Whether it's the reporting periods that you're applying for, whether it's, what you say you're going to use the cash for in the SEBA program, the
Mhm.
wage subsidy the periods in the wage subsidy program and your revenue drop. All of those things are, and we said this last time. This would probably be the least complicated government programs, these series of programs, because there's not a lot that you have to do, but it doesn't make them easy and it doesn't make them uncomplicated. It's just less complicated than these programs would normally be. Is that fair way to characterize that, Tim?
Yeah, I would say so. The hard part has been a year ago when they started, the rules were changing all the time. The SEBA is a great example. When it was the initial 40,000, you didn't really need to indicate that you were struggling at all. You just had to say you had expenses. Well, then they changed it to the 60 and they added this criteria that you needed to have a decline in revenue. So the bank started having you sign an attestation saying that. And that's why we have some clients that got the initial 40 but aren't eligible for the next, and they're getting pushback now because the criteria changed mid-program. But
Yeah.
at this point, yeah, they're fairly easy. They're fairly fleshed out now. There's just constant change at the beginning that has complicated the legislation around it too, for sure.
Okay. Maybe Giselle, I don't know if you want to turn on your or unmute yourself. Do you have any questions that you want to ask?
Yes, thank you. It's great you guys are doing this. Sorry, I was off camera because I have a bit of a migraine today, so I'm just trying to keep everything dark. So the application, I did submit it, and they come back with, you've missed something, but they don't say what you've missed.
Which program, Giselle, are we talking about?
SEBA?
SEBA?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if it's the receipts that you're supposed to, like the invoices or whatever you're supposed to attach, if there's issues with how you do that. Like for your rent, are you supposed to show them a contract, or is it just a pay stub showing that you've been paying? Just not sure about that.
For rent, I'd suggest a copy of the lease agreement, because that would support what your annual amount is. And then anything else, if you've got contracts or invoices, copies of those. Really what you want is the third party support. So that's something coming either from the landlord or from the contractor, as opposed to what's coming out of your bank account.
Okay, so I was doing sort of the
a
hydro bill kind of thing.
So if you have the hydro bill, you would give the actual hydro bill. You wouldn't give the payment out of your bank account.
Right. So I'm an independent, and I lost all my contracts as soon as COVID hit, being in the travel and meeting industry. Do you have to have employees, or can you still apply for it if you're on your own?
You had to have just the expenses if you didn't have employees, like you didn't have payroll in 2019.
Okay. So I did
as long as you have enough of the expenses to meet it, then you can.
Okay. I did the pre-screen and it came. Sorry.
Yeah, I just suggest beefing up the documentation and reapplying. Did they give you a number that you could call to discuss the application?
They hadn't
might be able to give you more information.
Yeah, I did call them and they did not receive it. So the bank had said that I had missed something and I've gone through it and it looks like everything is there. So they weren't able to help me because they hadn't seen that it had been submitted.
So does that mean your bank didn't submit it?
Right, I guess so.
But I think it goes into a portal though, does it not? Or does it go through the bank to CRA?
Well, I go to the bank website to fill out the initial form there, and then I have to go to the government to fill out the attachments.
Yeah, one of the things, and this is maybe Tim and Suzanne have more technical pieces, but I've been encouraging people to do is, because they're working through the banks, I would avoid kind of going through mid-level or lower level employees at the bank. I mean, if you're banking there, I'd be talking to a manager, assistant manager, and saying, I'm not getting anywhere, I need your help. And while they may not, and I know some banks are saying, look, it's not our program, we're just sort of the in-between. They are responsible for being the conduit for this program. So I would kind of make this a, certainly what I would do is be going to the manager and saying, it hasn't pitched up, or here are the challenges. How are you going to help me? Right.
Right.
And really put it on the bank to at a managerial level to get someone to help you walk through to make sure that it gets through to CRA, so you're actually getting a decision. Because if you're not getting, decision yes or no, there is no real appeal process for any of these programs, which is why we keep saying keep applying, right? Reapply, add some new information. That's part of it, because it's not like no, when you can't apply again. It's how do you because there's not an appeal process to that either. So the reapplying. So I would make sure you go to your bank manager and ask them, say, look, you're who I bank with. They have some responsibility. You're a client of theirs. Their difficulty is that it's not like they make any money off this, really. It's more of a they're doing it because they agreed to do it, but since they are, I'd be putting their feet to the fire. Tim, Suzanne, anything to add to that?
So I would say the loan's a tough one. The banks don't always want to work for you, because as Ian was saying, they're not getting anything from it. So they'll push you online, but then you'll get a decline and you don't know why, which is what's happened. So we find that our clients really need to advocate on their behalf, which shouldn't be the way this program is, but it is. So as Ian was suggesting, talking to the bank manager to really kind of figure out what's going on is usually the best way to deal with it. You're not the only one in this situation.
Yeah.
So
Don't
there
give
is
up.
2 parts though, right? There is 2 parts. You fill out what the bank form is, and then you have to go to the website of the CRA or whatever and fill that out, right?
Yeah, the CRA has the screening tool there that the banks will want.
Which I've done already. I've been approved through the screening.
Good.
Mhm. So it sounds like there was something at the bank side that was missing,
Yeah. Okay. So
or
I'll
that
just
they
keep at
marked
it.
as missing.
Okay. Thank you very
I
much.
wish we had a better answer for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I
It's
think
good to get some feedback.
that's where, because there's always a couple of partners, right? Some of these programs are done by EDC, BDC, the banks, and then of course CRA is the back end of most of this. So there's going to be some of this dislocation. So certainly, it sounds like if you've been pre-screened in, that even more reason to pick up the phone, and might as well just go right to the manager of your branch and say,
Okay.
look, I'm desperate here. You got to help me. What's the holdup? And get them on it.
Okay.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Usually is
Yes.
the way it works. It was my experience. So squeak away.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Ahmad, I don't know if you have any questions or want to unmute or turn your camera on and unmute. Let me see here if he's in the chat there. Could you okay,
Hello?
so here's the question. Oh, Ahmad, are you there? There you go.
Oh yeah, sorry, yep. So yeah, like the first question, as you see, we're just looking at, as a startup, wondering what kind of provisions were available, COVID related or even separate from that. And piggyback question here was what's available for startups in 2021 if another shutdown happened and there was no revenue generated the year prior, because a lot of these are, assuming that is the case.
So let's maybe just a bit of information, then I'll let Suzanne and Tim in. Are you a startup with, do you have any revenue, or are you pre-revenue?
No, not yet. No,
Pre-revenue? Okay, so because I think many of these, hello, Gregory has showed up. I think a lot of these programs rely on the revenue drop, which has been a problem. I know Communitech's been working on it, and Greg's, I hate to say this, but smarter about these things than I am around that. So, but maybe let's start with the first question there, Ahmad, on the emergency benefit or cash flow support programs and startups. Do you want to take a stab at that, Suzanne?
Or any in general. Just
okay.
Whatever, please.
For anything specific for startups, or just I don't think there was really anything recent that from the government.
Yeah.
There's been a number of other institutions, so like things like Communitech, Mars, that have their own specific supports. They seem to be doing more guidance and more assistance to startups, because they're more, that's
Yeah.
more their focus, and that's what they're basically there for. So that's where we suggest that people with startups tend to go, is looking at those, looking at BDC, because they tend to do a lot of startup support with financing and credit available. And then any other funding, so like if there's a special grant or anything that they can apply for.
So on that, before you go on, Ahmad, if you send an email through the chambercheck.ca website, you can send a question in there. What we'll do is we'll connect, Greg, we can do that with the folks at Communitech. And frankly, BDC does a lot there as well. So we can get connected with Kirk and Josh at BDC and to get some of their staff, but Communitech and BDC may have some on the startup stuff that is less COVID related, but maybe
there also might be some research and development type stuff. It depends what you're doing. So
Yeah.
startups, I find you need to look at the specific criteria of all the different, usually loans is what you're looking at, of all the different loan programs and grants. But yeah, as you were saying, it's fairly specific. So I think your approach that you're suggesting is good.
Yeah, so maybe Ahmad, tell us what, in that email, just what you do, what your business is, and what sector you're in, and then I think we'll make sure we get that to BDC and to Communitech, who can probably give better guidance on that. But for a newer company, and maybe this just relates to most of the programs that are in place, the emergency benefit programs. Startups or new businesses, for lack of a better term, are having difficulty because of you have to have financials for the previous year. Maybe just kind of go over, and the three main ones would be SEBA, the wage subsidy, and the rent program.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
all
so
right, that
the
makes
wage
sense.
subsidy and the,
Go ahead, Suzanne.
yeah, the wage subsidy and the rent program specifically, you really needed to have that revenue drop, because they use the same criteria. You basically do the wage subsidy calculation and then use the same revenue for your rent subsidy.
Okay.
Okay, and also just a side note, could I grab that email one more time? Just so I have it
Yeah, well,
down?
it's the website. If you go to chambercheck, all one word, .ca, that's where you register for this program. But I think you right in there, Greg, you can put a question in through the website, correct? Yeah. So if you do that and just with who you are, your contact information, what you do, and then we'll take that and forward it on and loop you in with BDC and Communitech.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Maybe now that I've got, I think Giselle and Ahmad and there. Well, Gregory just stepped away. I was going to get him because he and I read the same. And now he just darted off there. Maybe. What are you hearing from your clients around what kind of, what they're doing with cash flow support? So I mean, are they finding that the new rent program is more accessible? The first rent program was a disaster. Is this new rent program, are more people accessing it, and what are some of the tricks of the trade on that one? Because that's an important one for a lot of businesses.
Yeah. At the beginning, we weren't seeing as many accessing it just because of timing, that September, October wasn't actually as terrible as say April, March, May were. We're seeing a lot more now that have been affected more by the lockdowns and the restrictions that were put in place November and December. So we're seeing a lot more people applying for it. And as you said, it's a lot more accessible than the previous one was. You're no longer relying on your landlord to apply for you, basically, and to agree to take a revenue cut.
One thing that I find that is a real problem with it, though, is there are some who qualified through the original rent program because maybe they personally owned the building and their incorporated business rented the building from them. and they were allowed to, because it was the landlord that applied. And now through the new program, the government is putting up roadblocks because of the arm's length connection between the building owner and that is a real problem. Like I've got a couple of them that fairly serious situations, who they maybe they still have a mortgage on the building, a sizable mortgage on the building. They can't get the rent subsidy because there's this arm's length connection between the building owner and the tenant. Are you experiencing those problems as well? And is there any solution to it?
Yeah, I entirely agree with what you're saying. We're running into that, and we're looking at our structures that, I mean, no structure that we have right now was set up to deal with COVID issues.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
could have a holding company with your rental and your operating company somewhere else. And yeah, we're having the exact same issues and trying to see if there's any way to get around those rules. Because there are some access to some of those supports if you own it, but when you have multiple corporations in the structure, as you said, it complicates it, and it's not the easiest way to kind of get through those rules. So yeah, I'd entirely agree with what you're saying. Have you heard
Well,
anybody that's found a way to navigate that?
Well, the only way to navigate it, from our experience from last March, is we need enough people having that problem that eventually CRA makes the adjustment, says, "Oh well, yeah, I guess we do have a screw up here," because basically where it was a transferability, or the transfer from joint federal and provincial program into a federal program.
Yeah.
So now it's CRA that runs the whole thing. And, I don't need to tell you folks what CRA is like, but they look for the ability to build obstacles for getting, any relief from taxes or anything else. So, but we've been on the hammer with this, with fairly well-connected people in the feds at trying to get this moved, because there's more situations like this than I think the government even understands.
Yeah.
There are a ton, and because really, I think for a great degree, you folks are advising people who are incorporating their businesses and have an operation and buy the business or the building, and saying, hey, you might want to sell your business down the road, but you might not want to sell the building. Because that's kind of your retirement asset that you're looking for down the road. So we're creating these situations legally accepted by CRA and every other institution around government that says, here's how you incorporate properly a business. And yet now we're finding these fundamental problems with accessing government programs because of a stupid hurdle that, really, it's almost insane.
I just want to say that I've only been on calls with Greg now. This is the third hour today that I've been on calls, and obviously he went to lunch and took his cynical pills. So I
took my cynical pills many years ago when it comes to government. So
I know, but you're at a peak level today even from this morning's two meetings. Yeah. So. But that has been a challenge, and we haven't taken that to the on regular calls into the, as you say, into the folks in Ottawa. So
yeah, I think the other thing that's important to know, and I don't know whether you folks are running into it either, which is really important for new businesses, is that the Ontario Small Business Support Grant, you may have talked about this earlier, is now open to businesses that started after April 2019.
That's what was the one that we were waiting for your.
Oh yeah, and I think that's really important because there's a number of, oddly enough, somebody started a martial arts school back in October. I don't know why you do that during a pandemic when you're restricted in the number of people you can gather, but they did. And they were precluded from being able to get in spite of the fact they were locked down for obvious reasons. But now the province has opened it up a little bit, and I just don't know whether there are any problems that you've had, because Ian and I kind of spoke by email about this. You still have to qualify for the three main areas. But I don't know whether whether you've had any experience with any customers saying, I couldn't get that because of.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the fact.
we talked a little bit about that. And I mean, the requirements when it was announced was if you were in business and you were down, by 20% or something,
Right.
that you'd have access. Like pretty simple, except for you have to have been ordered to shut down.
Yeah.
You have to have, I think it's 20 or 25% revenue drop, and there's a third part of that. What was
Certain number of employees.
yeah, there's a certain number of
Oh
employees.
yeah,
So-
under 100 employees.
under
Yeah.
100 employees. So, the having to shut down screened out a lot of businesses. And we've used the example earlier today, Greg, of the dry cleaner who was down 45% at
Yeah.
that point, who's now down 85% because no one was coming in, but still not eligible. So
Yeah, I'm quite surprised they didn't put one further condition that you had to be dead as well. Because it almost seems like they put so many of these requirements in place that in fact, the only applications they're going to take are from dead people, which means they're going to pay out to nobody. But I don't know whether you folks have experienced that kind of level of frustration too with some of the programs that it almost appears to me to some degree that they're a little bit out of touch with what really happens on Main Street, Ontario, or Canada for that matter. Have you found that, especially when you get into the structure of businesses, and businesses are structured all kinds of different ways, and yet some of them were precluded from getting into some of these programs, and how have you dealt with that in advising your clients?
Yeah. Our standpoint, some of them seem to be either too hard to get into or too easy.
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, and the wage subsidy was a perfect example. We took the approach of contacting pretty much all of our clients because a lot of them thought they didn't qualify for some of these, and they did, because you can use accrual basis or cash basis or look at January and February prior year. The wage subsidy was an easy one.
Apply for 1 month, get grandfathered in.
Yeah. So some people that only get their cash, say every 3 months, qualify every month because they have months with no income. So that one was fairly easy. But then again, the rent one, as we were talking about before, is the one that we have run into the biggest issues of not being able to get people to qualify. But as Ian was saying before, the previous rent program, not too many people took advantage of it because not too many landlords were willing to take the steps to initiate it and take care of it. We had some that did, but not too many.
Well, and oddly enough, the only ones that would take advantage of it were really the ones that they owned the building, right? So like, what were they going to do? They were, that was the only way they were going to get any compensation, and they'd take that 25% hit. But, you take an individual that's their business. Why are they going to take a 25% hit when technically they don't have to? All they need to say is, no, I'm not going to enter into that program, and you got to pay your rent full, or you're out. I think the government missed the point by not communicating more concisely on some of the elements of these programs directly. I had a call yesterday, and you folks know this, that you can go on to CRA's website right now for the wage subsidy program, and there's no indication beyond March how to apply for the wage subsidy. And,
No.
so in business, and this particular individual was saying to me, in business, they like to forecast 2 or 3 months out. And looking at their particular situation right now, they're down 40%, by the way. So they well fit into a recovery of some sort. They can't project beyond March. So they're sitting back saying, what do I do with my staff when I don't know what's going on? And how can I, because as we know, the government made a change in January after, people had counted on getting wage subsidy in December, and then the rules changed slightly, and that precluded some from being able to apply for it. So,
and they have made the announcement that this is going to go through July, but they don't have the criteria. Is that the issue? Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything after March is
Yeah.
not posted yet. We don't know
Right.
anything about it.
So if you're a business, how can you forecast April and May, for production, because you don't know how much staff you can keep on. You don't know what your sales are going to be at this point because you're still working on that. So it's very difficult to start to forecast it. And you know what? Like we're, 3 days away from March. And that there's no indication at this point as to, and I don't know, have you folks heard when it's supposed to be available?
No, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I keep checking, hoping that it comes out.
Well, I know they took a hit. They took a bit of a hit with people complaining about the changes that they made midstream in December. Because in December or in January, because in December there was a company, Ian, they emailed you and I, about they planned their staffing levels for December around the fact that they were going to get wage subsidy, and a particular, and I can't remember the exact scenario, but then in January, CRA made some changes to it, and it exempted them. It took them out of, or it took their percentage way down, and so, had that business owner known that at the time, they would have staffed up totally differently. In fact, they would have had to lay off a bunch of people, but they didn't, expecting that, well, you know what, I'm going to get 75% wage subsidy. It's Christmas time. I can keep my staff, cleaning the floors or washing the walls or doing whatever. And it turned out that that it's costing them money now. And, in the midst of a shutdown, at that point, that's the last thing that a business needs. So, I think, somehow, Ian, we, with our resources like Tim and Suzanne and others in the region, we need to compile some of these things and take it to our contacts at the federal government and say changes got to be made. You got to fix this because businesses got to be positioned financially to be able to recover from all of this.
Yeah, I need more certainty around that. Now, one of the things, and I think Tim, you mentioned it, was the PPE grant program, because I think that's going to be important. Greg, we're going to be next day or so putting out a letter to the region saying we need to up our masking game, because between vaccines being available and being put in people's arms, there's going to be a lot of time. There's going to be 5-6 months, maybe more, and preventing the spread and containing the new variants. The one thing we know we can do, everyone can do individually and as businesses, is have good quality medical grade masks. So there's some costs to that. I mean, so maybe, I don't know, Suzanne or Tim, walk through what is the PPE grant program, which is the federal government. It's up to $1,000, because I think it's really just submitting receipts for eligible costs, and you get up to $1,000 grant for that. So for many small businesses,
is it the provincial grant you're referring to?
I think it is. That's the provincial one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we were saying before, there's certain industries that you need to be in to qualify for that, and then you apply through the province, and it's hard to say exactly what all criteria they're going to want on their end, but yeah, they need your receipts to show it.
Yeah.
One of the concerns I have is there's a lot more industries that need that than just those ones, but they are handing out a lot of money, so I guess they're choosing who to give it to.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another thing for Greg and I to take forward, and maybe part of our advocacy, Greg, is that if we're going to ask for more masks, that the province needs to be more, broaden that out so that businesses, because everyone should be using those. That is, it's crazy that we don't have enhanced guidance to make sure we don't have another spike and another wave. And we know that because of how the virus is spread, that surgical or medical grade masks is one of those absolute have to haves. So, but for those that are in that list, and again, if you go to chambercheck.ca, all of these programs are listed there. There's links that highlight or that open up and tell you the criteria, and we encourage everyone to go through to see to both Tim and Suzanne's point. what fits for you and what doesn't, and make sure you apply and be persistent about applying for that cash flow support, because cash flow support is really what this is all about for small business.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Especially now, because the light at the end of the tunnel is really in focus, and if businesses aren't prepared to come out of it, and they need resources, they need financial resources to escape the lockdowns and shutdowns. They got to restock or rehire or whatever. If they're not in a position to be able to do that, they're not going to be able to do that, and that's going to stall the economic recovery, across the country. If these small businesses aren't prepared to come out of this and take advantage of what we hope will be a pent-up demand from the consumer's perspective. That's key.
Ian or Greg, do you have any questions for us? It looks like the attendees have dropped off.
Yeah.
I think Tim and Suzanne, what would be really helpful to us, it would be helpful. You don't have to share detailed information and contact information, but it would really be helpful to have a list of issues that you would define as maybe being barriers that shouldn't be barriers. So maybe that arm's length thing with the rent program, maybe coming from a professional and saying, there are ways to make sure that nobody's scamming the system, as opposed to just cutting them right off. Same with the wage subsidy, in giving us the information of saying, these are the reasons why we need to understand clearly what we're able to apply for and what we're not able to apply for, a lot further in advance than maybe 30 days, because you've got companies that need to start forecasting or looking at what their business plan is for the coming months, especially during a pandemic. Things change on a dime from a supply chain network perspective, from an employee's perspective, whether there's outbreaks, whether there's more lockdowns, things change, and businesses need to clearly understand what they're in for. But having some of the detailed information on this from you, more of a professional's viewpoint on this, and we don't have to name you so that CRA comes all over you either, but just having that gives us the defense to go and speak intelligently to the powers that be in Ottawa that can maybe move the bar a little bit on this. So we have a really strong contact that is actually an assistant deputy minister. So
I think that would be really useful, and we're encouraging all of our expertise here. Give us some examples from the clients that you're working with, right? Like, dry cleaner X or manufacturer Z, or, car repair shop, or that you're working with, and just where some of those stumbling blocks are, right? Like even on we talked about the bank loan program, right? Like, we know there's a couple of sticking points there. Those types of examples, like real world examples of saying, Mac LLP is working with clients that are doing this, because it allows us to go, and I have regular conversations with Francis, as does Greg. When we get the specific problematic areas, and we can do this for you guys and your clients as well, is we just forward those right into Francis and say, here's an example where someone's getting stiff-armed or screwed, or there's not a good answer. That's the way to kind of make some, we can't do it one-on-one for everybody, but if we get those examples, we push those in, because sometimes those are the way they go, oh shit, well, if this is happening to Bob at the dry cleaner, it's happening to every other Bob that owns a dry cleaner across the province, right? Or the country. And then you start to get them going, maybe we should interpret it differently or make changes, right? So that's where these examples really make sense. So if you want to take some time to do that, just with some of those themes, and it doesn't really matter what program, they all probably need some help and all have their own challenges.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, what else would be really exceptional would be having a real valid reason that we need to extend the wage subsidy program. We think that going to the end of June simply isn't going to be enough. We're not going to have mass vaccination by that time done in Canada. In fact, it may even be optimistic to suggest that we're going to achieve herd immunity through vaccination by the end of September. Wage subsidies are going to have to continue until clearly business can open back up in a fairly open environment and do what it needs to do to generate its revenue. So, even having, some expert opinion on that, and I tell them all the time, look, I don't fault you sitting in Ottawa developing all this criteria. You are people that work in offices with no windows. So I understand completely that you don't see the whole world like we do out here who are working with businesses every single day. And I only said that because I checked with both of you in your background. You both work in offices with windows. So you clearly do see the world.
I can see from Suzanne is really enjoying your diatribe there, Glenn.
Well, but I think we
shut myself out though.
we clearly understand that there are reasons why they don't work with these folks every single day. We do. And they don't understand the complexity of their particular situation and business, and we do. They're trying to develop things that push as many buttons as they can, and they're genuinely interested in helping business. There is no question about it. They just miss so many points along the way that it's simply a clear lack of understanding of maybe how many. When Ian and I talked about this rent program with Frances McRae, and she started to do some background investigation. She came back to us and said, oh yeah, there's a lot more people than we thought who didn't qualify because of the arm's length problem. And, so that starts the ball rolling, and, all we have to do, we have to keep cranking it every single time we get an opportunity, so that eventually, in fact, I thought she was going to actually disable Ian's connection to the internet and telephone out back in April and May, because he was literally 4 times a week driving her insane with the wage subsidy program. And I actually, all those changes in the wage subsidy program that came along in June and July last year were solely because of Ian McLean's considerable effort at calling out the dogs every single chance he had. So this stuff really helps.
We developed Francis and Greg and I developed a friendship, but every day it would be, is there any questions? And of course, in those days, there was literally hundreds of people, and I would be the first one to unmute my thing and say, Ian McLean, Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber, have you made the changes to the wage subsidy program? Because this and this and this. And I say, I'm not being, try not to be angry here, but if you don't make these changes, I'm just going to keep talking. And so they finally made some. So I'll take all the credit. Greg never gives me credit for anything. So if he's put that forward, I'm taking all of it.
Yeah. If Ian wasn't the spokesperson and I was, there would have been challenges at getting any of the changes through, because I think
you would have got a cease and desist order of don't, yeah,
for sure.
Hey, listen, gang, thank you to both of you, but that would be helpful for you guys as a little takeaway for you guys. That would be very useful. We use the examples when people do come on or they send emails or we're having conversations as saying, here's the question that came up around this program, and try and use, if not the company, sometimes they say, I don't care if you say it's Bob's Auto Shop, if they're okay with that, but even saying sort of generic, Mac is working with clients in these sectors and here's the challenges they're facing, they take that. Like they take that and go, okay, because then they start to see where the systemic problems are.
Yeah.
And there's still going to be, as Greg said, they're not developing new programs. There'll be no new programs, but it's the ones that they got. How do they make them more accessible to fit more?
How do they tweak them?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, gang. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate your support and help.